listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, the coalition implosion continues. While the focus has been on the federal infighting, now the state parties in both New South Wales and Victoria are falling apart. One leader has been knifed, another has resigned, and the days seem numbered for a third. So just what is going on? We'll speak to a former Liberal Party insider to unpack the fallout. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Tuesday, the 18th of November. The family of Hannah McGuire has broken down in tears outside court after her killer was sentenced to 28 years jail for the young woman's murder. 23-year-old Lachlan Young strangled Hannah in her home near Ballarat in April last year and placed her body in a ute and set it alight in an attempt to stage a suicide. Hannah's mum, Debbie, speaking outside court after today's sentence.
While nothing can bring back what we've lost or erase the pain we continue to carry, today's outcome is an important step in our journey towards healing. We want to express our heartfelt gratitude to our family, friends and community for their unwavering support over the past 19 months. We could not have made it through without any of them.
The federal government has welcomed the UN Security Council's passing of Donald Trump's peace plan for Gaza. 13 nations backed the resolution. Russia and China abstained but stopped short of using their veto power. The plan is now set to clear the way for an international security force and a new governing board of peace. The US president hailed the decision as historic, confirming he will personally chair the board, though its makeup remains unknown at this stage. Our Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong says today is an important step forward.
We welcome these next steps and we continue to back in the ceasefire, which is so important to peace and stability in the Middle East.
And the finalists for the Macquarie Dictionary's Word of the Year for this year have been released. Among the top 15 words for 2025 include Ozempic face, Australian sushi and 6'7". Also a top nominee this year is bathroom camping, which is where you actively isolate yourself in the bathroom to seek solitude. Voting for Word of the Year finishes this Sunday with the winner to be announced next week. Now it's time to get into our deep dive on the Liberal Party implosion with former Liberal Party strategist Tony Barry. The federal chaos has now spread to the states. Victoria today has a new opposition leader, Jess Wilson, after Brad Batten lost support. The New South Wales Nationals leader, Dougal Saunders, has also resigned, and now speculation is rife. New South Wales opposition leader Mark Speakman's days are numbered. Tony Barry, who now works with major polling group Redbridge, warns the party is dangerously close to being obliterated unless it gets back to basics, puts economic management first, and wins back important young votes. Tony, gosh, all the focus has been on the federal coalition. Now it seems the state-based Liberal parties are falling apart. First question to you, what is going on?
Yeah, look, I fearlessly predicted 2.5 years ago on air that this would be a 3-leader term, so I was feeling quite omnipotent last night when the challenge went out. It's no great shock. I don't think Brad Batten would have withstood the surge in a campaign. He's very strong on law and order and crime. He obviously has a police background. But the number one issue in Victoria, like in Australia, is cost of living, economic management, housing affordability. And these are sort of issues which Jess Wilson is much stronger on. She's got a background in finance, economics. She's worked in private and public sector in the economic space. So she can really shape an economic narrative that I think will be pitched better at that sort of vote cohort that the Liberal Party's been struggling with at a federal and a state level.
So do you think the focus, just to your point there, Tony, is now going to flip with the Liberal Party, especially in Victoria, from crime, which is certainly front and centre in a lot of states and territories across Australia, back to the original, I guess, focus of the Liberal Party are better, according to the Liberal Party, economic managers?
Yes, their legacy strengths in research and in previous campaigns. Crime works as an issue. It's in the top 5 typically when we do polling and research. But there's a ceiling on how many votes you're going to get from that. And one of the big things we find in focus groups on crime is that they recognise it's a huge problem. They're concerned about it. It's evidence to them that the state is heading in the wrong direction. But when you ask them who's to blame for that or what's to blame for that increase in crime, it fragments. So some people say, well, it's the state government. Some people do blame the state government and the Premier. Some blame judiciary. Some blame the police. Some blame the laws. And others say, well, it's the parents' fault. What's happening there at home where these kids can walk out at 4 a.m. with machetes? So it sort of fragments. And to give you a contrast, you look at the issue of boat people. That is an issue in focus groups where 100% of respondents said, well, that's the federal government's fault. So you can't rely on crime to get you 50 plus 1% of the vote. You also need a very strong economic narrative, and that's been lacking in the coalition. And that's what Jess can offer the party.
So let's move now to New South Wales, Tony. We've seen Dougal Saunders, who is the leader of the Nationals, resign, citing family concerns and issues at the moment. Now speculation is growing. The New South Wales opposition leader, Mark Speakman, is on borrowed time. It's known by many as the so-called killing season in the lead up to Christmas. Do you think Mark Speakman will be rolled and Kelly Sloan is the new opposition leader as predicted by many?
I think Kelly Sloan is an outstanding candidate and a future Premier. What she has to be careful of is that she doesn't get burnt at the next election. Crispin's is a minority government, so there's some vulnerabilities there, but there are structural problems in the vote for the coalition, and in particular, Gen Z and millennials. So Gen Z is voters from the age of 18 to 28, and millennials are the age of 29 to 45. Now, federally, for example, the coalition is polling at 10% with Gen Z. Now, that's a very significant cohort where they're almost comically uncompetitive. In millennials, they're polling at 23%, which is not much better. Now, the coalition just simply cannot win an election unless they're doing better. Now, they don't have to win those vote segments, but they need to be at least in the high 20s, low 30s, because as voters get older, typically, baby boomers, the coalition wins pretty comfortably. But at the moment, they're getting absolutely poleaxed in those younger cohorts. And the challenge for the New South Wales Liberal Party is the same as the federal party, is the same as the Victorian Party, is that at the moment, their brand does not resonate with younger voters. They're seen as not focused on the issues that they're concerned about, which is particularly housing and the affordability of, cost of living affordability issues and the capacity to accumulate wealth. These are all issues that are top of mind for those younger voters. And climate change action is in the mix to them. And for them, it's a signal of your seriousness as a political party as well. So these are all sort of brand issues that the Liberal Party needs to overcome, which goes back to your original point that they need to focus on their legacy strengths, which has been economic management. And it's a great way to differentiate from their opponents.
Tony, you mentioned there about action on climate change. We saw quite a turnaround, and many would say there's been analysis saying it's a vote killer for the federal Liberal Party to back down on net zero, especially for the younger voter, which is, as we know, the young votes actually outweigh the older votes right now. So I've seen more analogies saying it's the jockeys, not the problem, being the leaders, whether that's in New South Wales, Victoria or federally. The problem's the horse. Do you agree with that?
There's a big risk with the coalition's position on net zero, but there's also potential reward. It's a very fluid subject. We are finding in our research that people are absolutely committed to lower emissions and action on climate change. However, they are softening in their support, primarily based off the price of what they're seeing on their retail prices. And so they're having some second thoughts and hesitations and concerns about the issue. So there is an opportunity for the coalition to successfully litigate that argument and to undermine public support for net zero. But I think the risks are far higher because it is seen as a proxy to many people for climate change. A lot of people in our research can't really explain what net zero is. When you ask them to define it in colloquial terms, they really get about halfway there and then they're sort of a bit stumped. But they think it's a positive thing They associate it with action on climate change. And so to sort of, Albanese has been unhelpfully for the coalition defining it as, well, you can't be serious about action on climate change if you don't believe in net zero. Now, that's actually technically not true, but it's a brilliant line and it's very effective. And it's a very simple definition for these people that don't have a definition.
You're a former Liberal Party strategist turned pollster now, Tony. In regards to what the future is for the Liberal Party, we know it's recorded its worst polling results in its history. It had the devastating election in May. Now we're seeing a killing season. They're taking out the Victorian opposition leader. Speculation, Mark Speakman, is done and dusted. And there's massive leadership speculation within the coalition, and there's confusion about exactly what the Liberal Party stands for. Do you think it's done and dusted as a party?
No, but it's getting perilously close. And I think the next federal election will be the making or breaking of the Liberal Party. They simply need to make significant ground. They don't need to win, but they need to become competitive again in those urban seats. They only hold 8 out of 89. And Australia is a very urbanised country. About 100 seats are in urban centres. So the coalition needs to get competitive there. And of course, a lot of younger people live in cities. So a lot of their message pitching to Gen Z and millennials will see some dividends in those urban seats. And the other challenge they've got, though, is, to professionalise their structures, their campaign infrastructure. But also they need to get away from the messiah and scapegoat complex, which a lot of them have had. This is not a new thing for the Liberal Party. To expect one personality to deliver a victory is just not real world. You need a team around you that's capable, hardworking, united, and delivering policies that are salient to voters and differentiated. So I think the risk for the Liberal Party is they just start churning through leaders because they're just like, well, you haven't delivered and therefore it must be your fault. It's not as simple as that. Yes, some leaders can be unpopular in the electorate. They don't click with the electorate, but it's always a lot more than that.
And in regards long-term, Tony, one may argue if it's the Labor Party, and we saw the Labor Party go through this when they were knifing prime ministers and changing leaders very, very quickly, the bottom line is it's bad for us as voters, it's bad for democracy if we don't have an effective opposition calling the government to account. We're all losers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is the danger for the Liberal Party. To your point earlier is this next election will determine whether the party is institutionally broken. Now, I fear it's getting very close to there. Usually there's cycles in politics. A government becomes on the nose. There's an its time factor. And as long as you are a credible opposition, you should win. But there does reach a point where you can't function correctly. You don't have enough professional staff. You don't have enough campaign resources. You simply can't attract candidates, good candidates. You might get a plotter in a safe seat, but they're not a future cabinet minister. They're not someone with ideas, with an ability to communicate that vision to the electorate. And that is a real concern for the Liberal Party. And we're seeing that at state levels. We've seen it with pre-selections opening up in various state divisions where you wouldn't say we're getting the kind of John Howards and the Peter Costellos and the Peter Reefs and some of these really strong performers of the past are less inclined now to nominate for politics and focus on a professional career instead.
We really appreciate your analysis as always, Tony. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
That was Liberal Party strategist turned pollster Tony Barry. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'll be back this evening with an episode of The Beefing on Pauline Hanson versus Marine Faruqi. And we'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.